Serious, people who have survived a murder attempt by dumb luck. What's your story? When I was about 10, my grandfather was dying from complications of his heart issues and mental deterioration. I didn't know him very well, as the last time we had been in contact him was when I was a baby. My father never liked him and didn't bother coming with me and my mother to visit him in the hospital. When we got there, he was resting peacefully and my mother went forward and whispered some words to him, I imagine about his current state of health. I hang back a little bit because the creepy old guy whom I didn't recall seeing in my whole life really freaked me out. Regardless of my anxiety, my mom said I should approach grandpa and share some nice words with him. I understood by how sad my mother was that I shouldn't argue too much, so I approached his hospital bed to speak to him. He didn't seem conscious at all, so I just did what my mother did, leaning forward and just whisper some nice things to him. Things took turn when mid-sentence his eyes flare open and he stares at me, making me stop what I am saying. My heart dropped into my butt when he looked at me because it was pure hatred in his eyes. As soon as we made eye contact, he bolted upright from his bed and wrapped his hands around my neck and started throttling me as hard as he could. I barely even remember what happened, but my mom was screaming for a nurse. And grandpa kept yelling at me while shaking my neck violently, FCKING betrayal, you betray me. And then he died. Almost as fast as it began, it was over. His grip loosened and he flatlined. My mother was inconsolable and I was extremely confused and crying out of sheer trauma at the situation. Later, after we managed to calm down, a nurse explained to my mother that his severe dementia had left him barely coherent and it was likely he had thought I was someone else. I didn't learn this until several years later, but my mother suspected my grandfather saw my father in me. My father was an alcoholic, womanizer and fairly abusive in my earlier childhood, and my grandfather resented him for it. I guess I look a little too much like my dad. Dang bro, I hope that doesn't play on your mind too much, even if you weren't that close. My dad has a client that owns a number of fast food restaurants. One day we were working at one of his stores, remodeling, and talking about robberies. The client told us that when he was just getting into the fast food business, he lived in Colorado. He was assistant manager at a chain that required him to wear a tie. A drug addict came into the restaurant to rob them and grabbed him from behind, putting a knife to his throat. He opened the register and the guy attempted to slit his throat anyway, except the knife was dull and couldn't cut through the material of the tie. The client began to fight back and escaped with minor injuries. Addict went to prison and apparently he has the tie in a frame at home. Was a bouncer at a club in LA for a minute in the 90s. Stopped some dudes clearly affiliated in a gang at the door after they refused security checks. After a few minutes of their threats and Manson lamps, they left spewing all sort of warnings. A little later it starts to wind down, and because it's a little slow and we're overstaffed, so I start to drink. I get a bit drunk. Not wasted, but sleepy buzzed, so I tell my buddy I'm going to go lay down in the back of his car for a while. A few minutes after lying down, I realize I have to pee. I get out and stumble a few into a spot between a guard gate for a parking lot and a building for a little privacy. There's a few dozen people milling around in front of the club. I'm about 25 feet away from the club's entrance and just off an alleyway. While I'm relieving myself, a dude runs right past in front of me, around the guard booth to my rear, and unloads a 9mm recovered rounds from backseat trunk roof bumper into the backseat of the car I'd just crawled out of. Bam 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 bam, unloading into the car. He then turns, runs right back past me, and down the alley into the night. Don't think he saw me at all. Nothing really came of it, except my partner was convinced I was a marked man and refused to be near me for a year or so. This was Los Angeles. I was about 25, almost 50 now, so some specifics are long gone, but I remember this. My buddy was genuinely terrified by this. I don't think he knew anything about it. In fact, he seemed to interpret the event as a larger conspiracy to have me snuffed, not some random pee-off dude making a point getting jumped in, and because he ditched the car wouldn't take my calls, it got left at that. For those concerned with the car, it was like a 1980s rusted out sedan, maybe a $500 car. Details about the slug's number of rounds fired were relayed to me later by third parties. My friend and I were known in the neighborhood. People were talking about it. Thank you for the well wishes. Honestly though, this wasn't even the first time I was shot at. It's been a long, strange trip. Also, I tried to argue later that it's just as likely the guy was shooting at someone else across the street and that the car just got in the way, but there were holes all through that thing. Backseat had 4/5, another 2/3 went into the back window and ended up in the backs of the front seats. Another 2/3 rounds went right into the trunk. I honestly don't know if he was a terrible shot, or if he hit right what he was aiming for. Apologies if I'm doing this wrong. I suck at Reddit. Imagine being so entitled that not being allowed into a club warrants murdering someone. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I was representing this guy that had embezzled almost $500K from his business partner. He was looking down the barrel at several years in prison. A bunch of his assets had been seized by the government, was being sued by multiple creditors for north of $2 million, and was in the midst of an ugly divorce and wasn't allowed to see his kids. I was one of 3 lawyers he had: criminal, civil and divorce. He was drinking a lot and using coke. I used to get this incoherent phone calls in the middle of the night that ranged from threats to crying. He came to my office one day and asked for me, but I was in court. My secretary said he was perfectly civil. He then went to his divorce lawyer's office and shot him to death. Got stopped by the police a short distance away and was wounded in a shootout. He would later tell the cops that he had come to my office to shoot me that day and also planned to shoot his civil attorney. I have a friend who had a party at his parents' house when he was in high school that a ton of random people went to. He got super drunk during the party and went upstairs to go to sleep, knowing that his friends would watch the party for him. My friend woke up from his nap to a guy from his school sitting on top of him stabbing him to death. He was stabbed 7 times before it stopped and he laid there on the bed dying. The only reason he is still alive is because his best friend came upstairs to ask him if it was alright if he made a frozen pizza and found him. The assailant was put in jail and recently was released, and it scares me to know that a guy who wanted to know what it would feel like to kill someone, said during the trial, is still out there free. Our neighbors when I was growing up had 3 kids the same ages as myself and my siblings. We were all friends and got along well for the most part. Their eldest child, I'll call him Peter, has Asperger's syndrome and was known to have outbursts that would sometimes be violent. One day, when I was 5 or 6, our mothers decided to take all 6 of us to a nearby wading pool because it was hot out. Well, due to that, it was pretty busy, and there were a lot of other kids. There were 2 lifeguards there, but were generally too busy chatting with each other to be doing their jobs. As my mother later tells me, I was off with my neighbor's daughter, was my age, and Peter, I don't remember why, but he suddenly flew into a fit and decided that I was at fault for something. He, being about 8 and a lot bigger than me, grabs my head and holds it under the water. I remember that. I remember not being able to breathe. I remember clearly thinking that I needed air or I was going to die. I remember fighting, but not being strong enough to get him off of me. Then I remember my mom's face. She had a clear look of both terror and fury. I remember looking over and seeing Peter sitting with his arms around his knees, rocking back and forth as his mother tried to calm him down. Then I remember my mom absolutely losing it on the lifeguards who had missed everything and were clueless as to why this tiny woman was screaming at them that her daughter had almost drowned on their watch. To this day, I have a fear of swimming and absolutely do not like having water on my face, even when I'm showering. I hope those lifeguards were fired. Clearly they are incapable to do their job. I jumped out of a moving vehicle. This was in college in a different country. There were commuter buses that takes us to and from the campus and dorms. I had to stay 30 minutes later for a project, so around 7:30 PM by then the commuter rush was gone. I was the only passenger and I was sitting at front next to the driver. He was acting already shady. It was dark and rainy. He made a sudden dock turn of a grassy unlit hill. He said something's wrong with the tires. I said I'm getting off. He won't let me. The hill leads to a cliffside where debaucheries and murders have happened before. I had the pointy stick of my umbrella facing him ready to jab if he tried anything, which he tried to reach grab for me. I jumped and ran straight to the highway where another commuter bus stopped, surprised seeing a girl coming out of the tall grasses. I saw the driver of my previous ride, speeding away. Nothing was wrong with his tires. I was abducted at a gas station during undergrad. The locks on my car were broken, and as soon as I got back in, a strange man came in and forced me to drive him to an ATM. I am paralyzed with fear, so any sense or reason I had went out the window. He claimed he worked at Wendy's and for my generosity he would give me all the Wendy's I ever wanted. On the way to the ATM he showed me pictures of his daughters on his clearly stolen cell phone. Then a Whitney Houston song came on the radio and he starts bawling his eyes out and screaming, "Why do all the good people have to die? Only bad things should happen to bad people." I go to the ATM, take out cash, give it to him thinking it's over. He then makes me get back in the car and drive him somewhere else. We pass by some train tracks and I'm thinking, this is it. This is where I will be murdered. He asks me what I'm studying in school, and I tell him biochemistry. I believe in jet propulsion and all that crap. We are not alone, aliens are among us. He then makes me pull over at a gas station and he tells me, "Drive away, sweetheart." I call the cops, had to do a lineup. Apparently this dude had done this to a ton of other women, and some were less unscathed than I was. I like that his best means of persuasion is freaking free Wendy's. Mine's not extreme by any chance, but a couple of years ago my brother and I went to walk the dog at like 11 PM. We left through the side gate, live on a corner, and right as we exit I see this weird looking dude at the corner of the footpath walking weirdly towards us. Got bad vibes and told my brother to get the dog and get back inside. This dude is walking kind of side on and hiding something in his hand behind his back. As I'm getting my brother through the gate, the dude says something like, "Oh, I mate, can I come in? I need a blanket, I'm freezing." I just ignored him and went inside and locked the door. We then get a call from the people who live 2 doors up. The same dude knocked on their door and their 10-year-old son opened it to see the dude holding a freaking hatchet. Anyway, I'm glad I went with my gut on that one. I don't know why, but when attackers use a hatchet the story feels 10 times scarier. My supposed best friend decided that my wife and I were too perfect. Therefore it must all be an act and I was obviously abusing her. He was at our house after I made an awesome dinner and we were having fun drinking and singing karaoke. I went to the kitchen to put some glasses away, came back and leaned on the couch with him slightly behind me to the left of me. Then I heard a thunk and felt an amazing amount of pain on the top of my head. He had picked up the whiskey bottle on the table and smashed it into my skull. I was very confused as to WTF was happening. Then the blood started pouring. I didn't want to get blood everywhere, so I went to the kitchen. Dude is pacing back and forth saying weird crap. I thought about my gun, which was close by, but I wasn't thinking quite straight. He left. I had a huge concussion and still suffer side effects from it. My number 2 goal in life is to live longer than that Ashat just so I can crap on his grave. I, 18th back then, now 25, was on my way home at night after meeting a friend. My home was just 10 minutes away from the train station. After a few minutes I felt someone following me. No big deal, I toughed, just someone else walking home. But I started walking faster. I realized the person behind me was catching up. Weird. In my head I started to make up scenarios of how to defend myself if the person would attack me. Never would I think of this to actually happen. Well, until I felt something on the back of my head, hitting me hard. I went furious. I turned around and attacked the guy. My mind was just full of anger towards this stranger who, what I thought, hit me. We were wrestling until I fell on the ground. He was sitting on top of me, strangling me. I tried to crawl my nails into his eyes as deep as I could, but I started to black out. Suddenly there was this tuft in my head, "Wake up, or you will die." Well, adrenaline kicked in again and I opened my eyes and screamed at the top of my lungs, attacking him again. That helped. He stood up and began to run. I laid there for a few seconds. Then I started to run home, still screaming. My mom was already at our door and opened for me because my screams woke her up. Or her mother senses. Who knows? She immediately called the cops and they could arrest him on the same night. It turned out that he actually shot me in my head from behind. They assumed that the gun didn't work properly. The bullet didn't penetrate my skull and stuck in there. But as far as I know they never found out why the gun misfired. I'm glad though. He told the cops that he already followed me a few times in the past, but never had the guts to do it. He wanted to kill me and violate my dead body. I know that's a wild story. I have some Swiss newspaper articles as a source if someone cares though. That's a heck of a tale. Glad you're okay now. Sources would be interesting, but that's just a morbid curiosity talking TBH. Sophomore year of college, went with a friend to go hang out at his old college. We were supposed to crash with a few friends of his, but we met a few ladies and ended up at a pool party. Next day went home and my friend started getting calls from one of his buddies' moms asking if he'd seen him. Turns out in the middle of the night a few guys broke into the house, kidnapped my friend's buddy and roommate. I took their car and drove them out to the middle of nowhere and executed them. I guess it was part of some gang initiation. I was supposed to sleep there with my friend. I still sometimes think about it and get the shivers. This happened in 1999 in Steubenville, Ohio. Someone posted a link to the wiki page in the comments. I can't help but imagine the sheer terror that these two friends went through at the end of their lives. Nobody deserves this. Bless their souls. I was 14 and outside in my garage petting my cat. It was November, so it was already dark by 5 p.m. Someone opened the door behind me without me hearing, grabbed me by my ponytail and starting dragging me outside. They hit me on my head with a brick and knocked me out, pulled me halfway around my house when, I'm guessing this is when, they stabbed me on the left side of my stomach. This must have brought me out of my daze, because my mom said she heard me scream from inside where she and my brother and sister were in the kitchen. They came out the front door and saw me bleeding out on the sidewalk, called 911. Had 12 stitches, double layer, a severe concussion, and whiplash. Didn't eat and hardly slept for a week. They never found them. Somehow believed for nearly 14 years I was 15 when this happened. Turns out I was 14. Horrid. So glad you survived. My mom got mad at me when I was 20 and I didn't give her money for her birthday, which I'm assuming was to pay off drug dealers of hers. So she stabbed me between the ribs. Ended up getting stuck in the bone and had to get it taken out in surgery. I was riding in a train across Eastern Europe. I was running low on money, and even though I had been warned that a woman should not travel alone in second class seating, I did not spring for first class. I was sitting alone in one of the compartments that seats 6. This was also a mistake and a very stupid one to sit alone. Eventually the train stopped and a man got on. He was very drunk. He came into my compartment and I guess thought I looked like his ex-wife. He attacked me. If it were not for the fact that this particular station was the border between two countries, I would be dead. Instead, border patrol from both countries were on the train, and while I was unable to scream, the door was open and at least a half a dozen uniformed men jumped him and saved me. I was in the hospital for a little while but recovered. At one point during the trial, one of the cops asked me if I wanted him and his buddies to hold the guy down while I hit him. I thought he was joking, so I said no. Go ahead, you do it. I was also joking, but it turns out they took it seriously and were about to. I did put a stop to that at least, but they were so offended that someone from their country would attack a young female American tourist. They were furious with him. So many people there depended upon tourism. But it turns out they took it seriously and were about to. I grew up in Ukraine. That guy probably got beat up later, lol. This all happened many years ago. I was a lead man at a factory. A girl starts working there, and I take an interest. After a few months, I find out she is in a terrible drug-fueled abusive relationship. Every night, I tell her to call me. I'll come get her. Finally, after months, she calls me. I come get her and take her to my house. The guy she was in the relationship with didn't take too kindly to me taking her away. He spends the next 2 years harassing and threatening us. A few months after she and I got married, we went out for a few drinks. Her ex just happened to be at the bar we went to. He apologized to us for the threats and harassment. We were sitting outside talking with a few other people. Next thing I know, I'm on my back on the ground with someone choking me. I try all I can to get them off of me, but being blindsided and them being on top of me, it wasn't easy. As I struggle to get free, everything goes black. Then I see the light at the end of the tunnel. In that moment I was certain that this was the end of me. I somehow managed to get a better hold of this person's head, and I yank them off of me. We run to the car and get away. A week or so later, my wife had been talking to everyone she thinks might know what happened. Turns out, her ex had paid 2 people $50 to kill me that night. I was doing volunteer work in Central America, working in a really bad area of the capital city. It was a slum built on top of the city's garbage dump. The whole place reeked of trash. and there were large metal cylinders coming up out of the ground throughout the area to vent the gas from decomposing garbage underground. As a fellow volunteer and I walked down a dirt path, two men approached us. I'd never seen them before. They were acting strangely, but I just thought they were drunk or high. A lot of people in the area drank rubbing alcohol to get drunk, since it was cheaper than beer or liquor. Over time, drinking the rubbing alcohol would really mess with their brains. As the men got closer, they began acting really friendly. Too friendly. One of them came close to me, trying to put his arm around my shoulders. At first, it seemed like the behavior of a guy who gets happy and friendly when he's drunk. However, an alarm went off in my head, and I gently, but firmly, pushed him away. I tried to make it seem lighthearted and playful, like, "Hey, man, how's it going?" Affectionate shove. I didn't want to make a scene. Since I was a gringo, I didn't want to seem like an ugly American. This went on over and over down the whole path. He'd get close. I'd shove him off. He'd come close again. Finally, my friend and I came to a fork in the path, and we went one way while they went another. After we got to the house of some people we knew, we told them about the two guys. I was so focused on protecting myself, I didn't even notice much of what was happening with the other guy. They said, "Oh, everyone around here knows him. That's his routine. He comes up to people, pretends to be friendly, puts his arm around them, then pulls out his knife and stabs them in the stomach." I was that close to getting stabbed to death. I don't know if this counts because I didn't find out until 10 years later. When I was 7-8 years old, when my parents broke up, my dad apparently tried to kill me and my mother, along with everyone in the house all the time, including the cats. He failed to get in house the 2 times he tried. My wife, my kids and myself went to church one time and we ran into one of my wife's old flings. This guy followed my wife around and our daughter and kept trying to talk to them. So I confronted him about it and told him to back off. As we were leaving, he makes sure to yell across the parking lot telling my daughter goodbye. My wife forces me into the car and we leave. So I message the guy on Facebook to ask him what his problem is and he tells me that my wife and daughter are his friends and I have no right to tell them who to be friends with. I told him again to back off or I would call the police. Fast forward a week. I worked every other Sunday. I get a call from the pastor saying that they had to call the police on the guy because he was causing drama looking for me. When they arrested him, he had a backpack with him that had a sawed-off shotgun, a M pipe and some M in it. I'm seeing M as a common denominator in many of these stories. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.